Hey, good afternoon. So I want to ask, are you lazy? Now, I mean lazy in the sense of being productive, not don't want to get up, go get a job so I can pay my alimony lazy. No, I'm talking about lazy in the sense of automating all of your astrophotography so that you can get as many images taken in a single night. If you're that kind of lazy, then stick around. So today I'm going to show you my Nina advanced sequence, how I have things configured, how I set it up, how it creates my workflow, and introduce you to top to bottom an advanced sequence that I know that works for me, and I think that you would be able to take elements of it, if not the entire thing, and make it work for you. So anyway, I'm looking forward to showing you through this. We'll go over and get on the computer here in just a second, and I'll open up Nina and we'll get started. I'm Doug, and this is AstroAF. All right, I want to let you know that I've written a companion article about this over on my website and my blog, and it pretty much goes through and kind of details everything that I'm going to talk about here. So if you prefer to read and go through a set of instructions in that way, I have that available. I'll also be embedding this video into that blog post once this is published so that you can do either. The link to the blog post is down in the description. I'll pop it up here on the screen too. So, okay, let's jump on in. So over here in Nina, I am remote desktop into my mini PC that's on the telescope right now and running Nina. And I currently have the 3.1 HF2 version loaded. And I believe that's current right now for what I'm using. So anyway, let's jump over into Sequencer. And what I've done here is I've kind of collapsed everything so that it's a little bit easier to digest going through. But there's three main sections, and there's a startup area, and then there's the body of our sequence here in the middle, which actually performs all of our imaging sequence and other tasks. And then in the bottom, there's an ending sequence. Starting at the top, my startup sequence is very simple. So what I do is I have a wait for time instruction, and this is when my sequence is going to start. And I have it set at nautical dusk, not astronomical, and that's because it takes a little bit of time to go through the sequence and have it perform all of the tasks for me. And by the time that I'm done, it will be dark enough, especially if I'm using narrowband filters. I adjust this with this offset plus or minus. Right now I'm set at -15. That makes this start just a little bit earlier. The Robocopy is another one that I use. So this plugin is available, and this automates my file transfer. And so I have this set up to my source directory, which is the location that my image capture saves my images. And then I have it set up to a destination directory. And here, this is a network share location. And I have a video on that, and I'll put a video link up for that on how to configure your system for, in this case, Mac, to have a file share on your network. And this will automatically copy all of my images over throughout the night. And when I wake up in the morning, I will have all of my images on my processing computer, and I don't have to wait for any of that transfer time. And then I have this notification service here, which in this case is for pushover. And this is another plugin called Ground Station, and pushover is one of the options that you can use in Ground Station for that. And I send myself a notification. The pushover sends a notification to my phone. It's not free, but it's $5. So it's like nearly free. I really like it. So, I'll send myself a notification that the sequence started successfully here, and then I'll receive that on my phone. So if I'm away, I can actually monitor and see if that sequence started. And if it didn't, I can remote into this machine and see what's going on. All right, so that's pretty much the startup. I don't have much that I do in there. Okay, this is the meat and potatoes of the sequence here. And for me, this is my sequential imaging and flats instruction set. And yeah, you heard that right, flats. I automate my flats in the morning, and we'll get into that. That's at the bottom of this section. So if we've opened this up, and I'll come down here to placeholder. And within this placeholder, there is a blank target. This is because this is my template. And whenever I start a new project, I start with this template. Whenever I'm in multiple nights of the same target, I don't use my template any longer. I will save off a actual target JSON with the tools down below here, and I can show you if I wanted to open up my targets, and I have all my targets in here that I can load, and these are all of my saved sequences. So when I'm working on a multi-night, which I'm working on SH2 132 right now, I can keep opening this up, and my target and all the instructions will be loaded in for me into my sequence, and I don't have to do any target framing and rotation, and everything is already set up for me because I did that in the beginning. And we'll come back here to this target in a moment because it's an important part of what I do, especially on my first night on a new target and how I set that up. And I do want to cover that. So in the exposure info, this is just kind of a history of exposures here. And it doesn't, I don't really look at it that much, but if you want to go back in for a session and see what your history and how many exposures on various filters you have for your sessions, then you can keep coming back into here. And then I have a trigger section here, and I set up my meridian flip. And when this is running, I will actually have a time to meridian that shows up over here that tells me when the meridian flip is going to occur. And then after that, I have a center after drift instruction, which I check my exposures real quick after each exposure to make sure that they are still centered. And if they have deviated by a distance that I have defined over here, so 1.08 arc minute, then it will go ahead and rerun a plate solve and recenter for me. And after that, it'll restore guiding, and it will give me, if I have any errors, it will send me failures to push over. So if I lose guiding for any reason, this will attempt to restore guiding. And if I have any failures for any reason, this will send me a notification, and it'll give me a detail of the error that was encountered. So scrolling down just a little bit here, we get into our loop conditions, and in the loop conditions is where we actually loop. Literally, we loop through this set and continue doing it until some condition is met. In this first section, I'm setting up my rig, so I'm doing an equipment check here, and all I'm doing is I'm unparking the scope, I'm setting my tracking, which is sidereal in this case, and I'm cooling the camera. If I've forgotten to do it, when I get things going, this will automatically cool the camera for me. It will not progress until the camera is, in this case, at negative 10 degrees Celsius. Once those instructions are met, then we'll continue on and we'll set up the start conditions for the target. I'll wait until above horizon with no offset, so that makes sure that in my target that it is above in obstructions. And then I do a prepare target. And in here, I do a switch filter to my luminance because that's what I like to do my plate solving and autofocus with. And I'll talk more about autofocus in just a second as well. And then I'll do a slew and center, which will be a slew and center to the target that was defined above. And then once we're plate solved and centered on target, then guiding will start. I don't do a calibration here. I do that manually, and I do that only when it's needed. There's no need to waste time on that. And then I'll start my imaging. So I send myself a notification here that my imaging session has begun. That lets me know I made it through all the startup. And I have a mono imaging block here that I have a trigger to autofocus after an HFR increase. So if you notice, I did not do an autofocus previously, and I do not do explicit autofocuses in my sequence because they're a waste of time. So this right here will continue to check, and if my HFR deviates by 10%, it will run an autofocus automatically for me. And then my loop until time I have set to astronomical dawn. And so anything that's within these loop conditions here is then going to continue to run all night long until astronomical dawn, and then it will fall through into the next sequence of events. And I will have another one here in case I encounter a obstruction. I'll loop until the altitude. I'll loop while the altitude is above any horizon obstruction, but if I hit it, this will also stop it at that point. So if I have an obstruction that occurs prior to astronomical dawn, this will go ahead and stop my sequence and let it go through to the next area. So I use another plugin here, which is Sequencer Power-Ups, and I don't use it to its full extent yet. I am kind of experimenting with it. Right now, I have set up some constants so that I can easily change my exposure values in this case for different filters right here without having to go find them in the list here. And it's just a little bit harder to read. So I like to, yeah, they're right here. So I can change a value here and it'll update where it's used down here. So loom exposure or loom exp is a variable. And so I have that variable name here and I assign its value, in this case, 300 seconds. And I do that for all of my filters. And then I loop through my exposures. Now, depending on any night that maybe I'm just doing SHO or something like that, in those cases, I would disable, and I just go in here and, I disable or enable what I want to use for the night. So that'll loop through and keep taking exposures until we get to the loop conditions here. And when it completes and we hit the loop condition ending, it'll send me a notification that my looping exposures has ended, and so my imaging has ended. And then we go into a kind of a cool down period. So at that point, I give myself a notification that my imaging session has ended, and I stop guiding, I park the scope, and then I wait. So I'm waiting for sunrise here. And once we reach sunrise, I go ahead and cool the camera again. And once the camera has cooled, I send over to pushover that my flats frames has begun. And then I run this set of instructions here for flats. And so I unparked the scope and then I slew to my alt as of 90 degrees and 90 degrees so that I'm pointing at the zenith. And then I select over here whichever exposure filters I need for flats. That's going to be the same as what my main exposures were. So I'll enable or disable what needs to be here for my filters. Then I'll run through and the sky flats will go ahead and run. And once that completes, I fall down into my sequence end. So if we open that up, then I'm doing a shutdown here. I got myself a notification that the flat frame's completed. And then coming into shutdown, I switch my filter so that it's set up for me for the next night's session, because I always start with my luminance with autofocus and stuff like that. And then I warm the camera. And then I set a stop on RoboCopy at 5 minutes here. That gives it time to make sure that any flats that I took have chance to transfer over to my processing machine. And then once that completes, I send myself a notification that everything completed successfully. So I wanted to talk about how to do a couple things here. And what's really important is like this placeholder here. So how do I use that? There's a couple different ways that we can populate this with our target. We can start with the framing wizard and we can load in a target here. And so right now I'm on file. So I mean, I can just use that, or you can use your offline sky map and we can put it in an object. So like M16, we select that and we can load the image. All right, so now we have M16, and then I can change my rotation, everything that you can do here in the framing assistant and get this framed up the way that I want to, which I'm not going to do now. It's a little out of scope. But then once I get my framing exactly the way that I want, then I can add target to sequence, but I don't want to just click here. I want to click this drop down and I want to update existing target in sequencer. And I click on that, and then here I've got my placeholder. And so if I click on my placeholder, I can go over to my sequence now, which it took me over there automatically. And now M16 is automatically loaded up for me, and I can see what its visibility conditions are, which right now it's really no longer available to me, maybe just for a little bit in the night here, but it's really low. So one other way that we can populate our target is by using our Sky Atlas. So we can come to Sky Atlas, and in this case, just for brevity, we'll do M16 again, and we can search for that. And that gives us M16 here. And the way that I use this is I set for Framing Assistant, so that'll take me back over to the Framing Assistant tab. If you already have a sequence created, you can add to your sequence here. In this case, I'll just set it for Framing Assistant and it will load up for me. And then the process is the same. And then at this point, I can just update here an existing target in sequencer. And then we can, again, select placeholder. That'll take me over here. And we've populated the target. So now I want to come back over to the imaging tab because I wanted to talk about autofocus. I do my autofocus here manually before I start doing anything. But the first thing I do is I come over to the options tab for imaging and I will turn on annotate image. I leave this off for any other time because this takes up additional processing power and slows things down. But initially what I'll do with annotate image, and then I'll enable annotation here, and I'll go to the manual imaging tab, and I will just take some images and I'll see my HFR annotations here, and I'll come over to my focuser and I'll move in and out until I get the best manual focus that I can get, because it's really important to get as close to good focus as you can before you start an autofocus. So once I get that, then I'll go ahead and start my autofocus. And so like if we take a look at, that was a weird one. So I'll run an autofocus, and I think that last one was like an autofocus attempt when clouds came through and it wasn't getting anything. So here we have an autofocus that I run. And at that point in time, once I get my autofocus done, this is like an initial autofocus. I'll be pointed at like Polaris. Then I'll go ahead and undo or disable annotations. Then I will come back over and I will run through a 3-point polar align because I like to be pretty good focus for polar alignment. And I'll run through that. And once I'm polar aligned, then I'll come over to my framing. And usually, like if I'm working, I'll on an existing project, I'll go to File, and then I'll load an image from the file, and then I'll go back in to a session that I'm currently working on in this case, and I'll grab an image from this, and I will load it. And then I can do the plate solver, and the plate solver will actually solve my image. So at this point, with my image solved, I am set up and I can check my rotation if I want to. I can determine rotation from camera at this point to make sure that I am lined up. I know that I am right now. And it's also, I can't do this at this point in time because it's daylight. But at this point, once I know that I have my framing is set up correctly with my last session, and if I haven't moved my camera or rotated my image train in any way, then I have nothing else to do here but go ahead and slew and center to the target, okay? I'm already gonna have my target set up because I'm gonna load my sequence from the previous night. So I'll slew and center, and if I do need to rotate, I can slew, center, and rotate here to check my rotation. This will give me instructions on what I need to do to rotate clockwise or counterclockwise. But I'll go ahead and slew and center at that point, and then I'll be lined up. Now, since I've probably made a pretty big slew, I'll go back over to the imaging tab and I will run my last autofocus prior to beginning my session. And I'm running that on luminance. Now, you might have thought to yourself, what about when you switch filters and focusing? So what I do there is I run this filter offset calculator, and this goes through and runs a series of autofocus for each filters and gives me the offsets that I need for each filter. And my base autofocus filter is luminance, and then everything else is compared, and I get an offset for all the other filters. So if we go into autofocus, then we can see that I have focus offsets set here. So these are steps. So minus 20 steps for my red from 0, 18 steps for my green to 0, which is lum. My blue is parfocal with the luminance. And then I get into my narrowband, which are quite a bit different. I don't need to autofocus each of my filters. I only need to autofocus my luminance filter. And then when I switch filters, I get the autofocus step size changed for me for the particular filter. And we can probably see that. So if I'm on Loom right now and I switch to, let's say, S2, so watch our position right here. And I'll go ahead and change. And notice that the focus position has changed for the offset of that filter. All right. So if my luminance is in focus, then the offsets are going to be applied, and then my filters are going to be in focus. So I don't have to run autofocus for every filter, only for luminance. And I do it before I start my sequence, because then I don't have to run an autofocus during my sequence, other than if the conditions are met for the HFR is greater than 10%. That's a big time saver. And really, so everything that I just talked about only takes a few minutes to get started up. And here, I'll talk about that a little bit more. So yeah, so everything that I did there, it took a long time to kind of go through and describe everything, but I'll come up and connect to my scope and get all the devices connected, and I'll get my preliminary manual focus done and a 3-point polar align ready to go. I'll get framed up on my target, my autofocus completed, and start my session in about 15 minutes, and I'm done. I am watching exposures at that point. Auto guiding will automatically start for me. It'll run through the night. It's done. It's going to do the filter exposures that I have configured for it for that night. And then when it finishes, it'll go ahead and park itself and warm the camera and wait until sunrise, and then it'll automatically loop through and do my flats for me. It'll unpark the scope, cool the camera, it'll slew the scope to the zenith, and it'll run the flats. And I come out in the morning, I get to sleep, I don't have to worry about anything. I get notifications if anything does go wrong, where I can get up and handle it. But for the most part, it doesn't really interfere with much at all. That's something out of the ordinary happens when that's the case. So realistically, I have like 15 minutes of startup every night. Now I know for a lot there's more involved for you than myself, because I leave my telescope set up. So I understand that you've got setup time, and you've got to get your lined up to the north and get it close so that you can even start doing a polar alignment, so there's more time in that. So, but not counting that. So imagine that you get your scope pointed north and you're ready to actually do the polar align. You need to get focus and everything still. So for me, that's about 15 minutes, and I'm up and running, and click a button and my sequence runs, and that's all that it takes. Anyway, again, I've got a blog article on this, and that's down in the description, and this video will be embedded there too. So if that helps you to go through and read more than watching the video, I know I probably went through this a little too quick, but trying to keep the video short. And obviously, if you've got questions down in the comments, please leave them. Hit me up over on my Discord server. I have free data over there, so if you're looking to practice on your processing, Head over to my Discord server. Link is in the description. You can grab yourself some data to use for free for your own practice. I'd love to have you become a member. There's a price point for anybody. And then I do perks as related to that that'll give members some extra things that you don't really get as a non-member. So anyway, I hope that if you'd like to support this channel, you could do that. And I also have links down below for affiliate links. And if you're thinking about buying something on Amazon or Agena already, then I have affiliate links down there for lots of individual things. I also have links for buy anything at Amazon and Agena. So those two places, I encourage you to please use one of my affiliate links if you'd like to support this channel. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you found it helpful, and I look forward to your questions. And my name is Doug, and this is AstroAF.